sir.
The question is not how far. The question is, do you possess the constitution, the depth of faith to go as far as is needed?
Bill Warwick IV, writer, author, investigative journalist, and UFO researcher. March 12, 1997, he witnessed a 400-foot wide boomerang-shaped craft, not an aircraft, float over his head in Norfolk, Virginia. He immediately got on the intercompany CB radio and asked if anyone else in the area had seen anything. He called in sick the next day, and that was March 14, 1997, he was fired without any explanation after over a year's service. This began a 10-year quest to find out the truth, the lies, disinformation behind the event in the Phoenix Lights, which occurred the evening after that incident.
Just a few days after the national media broke the news about the Phoenix Lights, the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, held a press conference in which he basically made a mockery of the whole situation. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, he was under indictment by the federal government, and I'm not sure if that had something to do with his preoccupation with making a scoff of the whole situation. However, as we all know today, he did see something. He saw something at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and he described it as being otherworldly. Because of the total lack of information about any similar events to mine that occurred in the Norfolk area, I began my investigation by trying to find out as much information as I could about the events that occurred in Phoenix on March 13th, 1997. As part of my investigation into the Phoenix Lights, one of the most qualified witnesses that I came across was Captain Trig Johnston, a former Northwest Airlines captain with over 20,000 hours of flight time, who described in great detail the formation of the lights that he witnessed traveling over his house and continuing onwards over Camelback Mountain.
This thing has been spun from the beginning as flares. The video that I've seen of the Phoenix Lights has no relation whatsoever to what I saw. The video of the Phoenix Lights are these lights in one spot, are not moving. You know, they look like flares. Go down in the vicinity of Yuma sometime and watch them, because once you see a flare, you won't ever not be able to recognize a flare again. I've seen lots of flares. I know what these flares look like. And they're really cool, and they have a similar color. They put out an amber light very similar to the lights on the craft that I saw. They were huge. It was just mammoth. That's the thing that just, you can't quite get across unless you see it yourself. These were big lights. The distance from one end of the lights to the other was at least, at the very minimum, a mile. And it wasn't jets. No noise. It was just utterly silent. So, well, helicopters. No helicopters, no wop-wop, no noise. There was no movement at all between these lights. This was a craft. Turned right to a heading of 180. No bank. Airplanes bank. Any airplane is going to bank. This thing did not bank. And this thing is brushing the ground. It's almost in the telephone wires. And yet when we looked up like that to see the lights, the big lights that we had seen from a distance, we could no longer see them. It was blacked out by its own structure. But if you picture something about, say, 4 times the size of Camelback Mountain, or take 4 USS Ronald Reagans, lay them end to end, and waltz that down Scottsdale Road, and that's about what we saw. But, given the other things that have taken place, I mean, this is, if you think of it just in terms of the Phoenix Lights, which is a terrible name, but that's the name we're stuck with. If you just think of it in terms of the Phoenix Lights, I don't really see any danger there. But when you start making the connections to these other things, then there's some real danger there, perhaps lethal danger.
On April 2nd, 1997, the national news media was focused on a story about U.S. Air Force Captain Craig Button, who took off from a base in Gila Bend, Arizona, which is just outside of Phoenix, and allegedly took his A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft with 4 live Mk-500 bombs and traveled 800 miles to a mountain in Colorado and allegedly crashed it into the side of the mountain. Shortly after beginning my investigation into the Phoenix Lights, the U.S. government issued a report from Luke Air Force Base stating that the lights that were seen in Phoenix, which are now infamous, were actually flares that were dropped from a visiting Air National Guard unit from Maryland. And interestingly enough, these aircraft were reported to have been A-10s. So the government's story that the flares seen in Phoenix were dropped from A-10s really made me interested in what exactly might have happened to Craig Button. I began to consider whether or not the loss of Craig Button and his A-10 Thunderbolt II might have some connection to the Phoenix Lights, which occurred 2 weeks prior to his disappearance. Did Craig Button know something that he shouldn't have known? Was he in the air when these A-10s allegedly dropped these flares? Did he see a UFO? Could this be the reason why he was either killed or murdered or perhaps committed suicide? It seemed to me that the breaking of the stories of the Phoenix Lights on June 18th were done in such a way so that when the Roswell report was issued by the United States government, it would basically make the reports that were coming out of Phoenix look not quite so credible. Mike Fortson was instrumental in introducing me to former City Councilwoman Frances Emma Barwood. She was the woman who had the courage and the tenacity to stand up in front of the City Council of Phoenix and ask the City Council members what they were going to do about the situation.
I told them that the reporter was outside from Extra and that they were trying to find out what this object was that went over Arizona and could we investigate. And everybody just kind of turned around and, I mean, in unison, they all looked at me and I thought, what did I do? Apparently, everybody else was told, you do not ask about this. But they never told me, don't ask about this. After the meeting was over, I asked the deputy city manager, who I knew very well and liked, and I said, Pat, could you tell me what is going on? Why did everybody kind of get a little upset when I asked that question? And he said, you shouldn't have asked that question. And I said, why? And he said, because the mayor does not want anybody to talk about that. And I said, why? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, could you find out? And he said, okay, I'll try. And within a couple of weeks, he was dead.